Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CASA webinar on funding opportunities for our biomethane. As SB, I'm Greg Kester, the Director of Renewable Resource Programs for the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, and it's really a pleasure to welcome you all here today. As SB 1383 is implemented to divert organic waste away from landfills, we recognize that the wastewater sector can help meet the objectives of the legislation by co-digesting diverted food waste. By doing so, we will exponentially increase the biogas that we're producing, and it's critical that we have viable and sustainable uses for that biomethane. And that is really the focus of today's session. And for that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Allison Nojima, known as Noji. She is Brown and Caldwell's National Energy Leader and specializes in energy financial analysis for various biogas utilization technologies. She supports clients by working together to identify the best combination of alternatives that provide economic value and achieve their energy and sustainability goals. She has served as an engineer on wastewater treatment, design projects, and feasibility studies, including biogas upgrading to RNG, cogeneration, co-digestion, and digestion. She's passionate about renewable energy and finding grants and opportunities to help the right projects move forward. And before we get started, I just wanted to note that if you have questions during the presentations, you can please type them in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We won't use the chat for this webinar. And I'm going to, each speaker I will introduce before they start, and then we will hold Q&A until after everyone has spoken, and we'll have that at the end. And with that, I'd like to please welcome Noji.
Thanks, Greg. Let me get my slide sharing. Okay, is it showing up on your end?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks for having me here today, everyone. Yeah, as Greg mentioned, going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, and specifically opportunities for the wastewater sector. So the Inflation Reduction Act was passed in August of 2022. It is administered by the IRS, and it's really a 10-year plan that changed a wide range of tax laws. Some of the goals of the IRA are fighting inflation, reducing price of prescription drugs, and of interest to this group, reducing carbon emissions. And the IRA is one of the largest investments in combating climate change in U.S. history. And so it funds clean energy investments via grants, loans, tax credits, and rebates. So some of the highlights for this group, the Inflation Reduction Act, first, makes tax-exempt agencies eligible for these tax credits in the form of a direct payment. You may also hear it called an elective payment. But this is huge because previously, if you didn't pay taxes, you could not apply for these clean energy credits. And you'd have to work with a private entity in which, you may receive some of the pass-through benefits of the credits. But now, with the IRA, tax-exempt agencies can apply for tax credits, and you don't have to work with a private partner. The other key highlight of the Inflation Reduction Act, the investment tax credit was extended for facilities that begin construction before the start of 2025. It was expanded to include a qualified biogas property for projects starting construction before 2025. Some of the eligible projects under this are anaerobic digesters and RNG. And then there's also a new technology neutral clean electricity investment tax credits for projects starting construction after 2025, but before 2032. And then specific to RNG, there's an alternative transportation fuel production tax credit, and that lasts from 2025 to 2027. I will go into more details on these in the following slides. So how much money are we actually talking about? Um, so in terms of the investment tax credit, it's really a credit that is based on your eligible project costs, which are generally thought of as your construction costs. So these credit values range from 6% to 50% of the eligible project costs. It's based on a pretty prescriptive formula, but there's a 6% base credit, a 2% bonus if you can meet domestic content requirements, 2% bonus credits if you're located in an energy community. And then on top of all of that, there's a 5 times multiplier if you can meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. I will go into details on this or these different bonus credits, but you can see in the table below kind of an example of how you could get from anywhere, between 6 and 50% of eligible costs. It's really the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements being met that gives you that significant multiplier. So the inflation or the investment tax credit eligibility, I just wanted to walk through this, like what types of projects are eligible. So if your construction starts before 2025, combined heat and power, solar, geothermal, fuel cells, wind, this new qualified biogas category, energy storage like batteries and microgrid controllers, those are all eligible technologies that you could get a tax credit on. After 2025, you can see the list is dwindled down a little bit. Combined heat and power still eligible, solar, energy storage, fuel cells, and wind, but qualified biogas or digester and RNG projects are no longer included in that envelope. There is also a caveat that the electricity produced must have a greenhouse gas emissions rate no greater than 0. So this puts some operational constraints on in terms of natural gas blending, if that's something you'd be thinking about. And we're still waiting for some guidance from the IRS as to confirming that wastewater biogas does have a greenhouse gas emissions rate of 0. I think it depends where the boundary is drawn. I've heard it go both ways, but just wanted to throw that in there. So on the contrary to the investment tax credit, there's also a production tax credit. The difference between that is that the production tax credit is based on the amount of fuel you're producing. In this case, I've shown the rate for RNG. And so this credit value can range from 20 cents to $1 per gallon of fuel. It's also based on an equation, which is a 20 cents of a base credit rate, and then the 5 times multiplier if you meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship. The base credit is also multiplied by an emissions factor and inflation. And as I mentioned, it applies to fuel that is sold between January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2027. So there is a limited window in which you could get this PTC. It is in addition to RINs, so you could stack those. Okay, energy communities, because that's how you could get, a 2 or 10% bonus credit. And it really depends on where your project site's located, maybe out of your control if you're a wastewater treatment plant. But one of the goals of the IRA is to advance development and deployment of these clean technologies in disadvantaged communities. And so by incentivizing it with an increased investment tax credit rate, hopefully that will enable folks to develop those projects. But some of the criteria for energy communities, brownfield sites, communities that were based on dirtier fuels and have an above average unemployment rate. And then if there's a census tract where a coal mine or coal-fired power plant retired after 1999. And then there are also some low-income communities that qualify under wind and solar. The IRS has released some guidance on this, and there's actually a map available, so you could check to see if your facility falls into an energy community and would qualify for that additional tax credit. Domestic content is something that becomes important specifically for the direct pay. But I mentioned you can get a 2% bonus on the base credit if you are able to meet domestic content. So what does domestic content mean? 100% of the iron and steel that is structural in nature must be made in the US. In addition to that, a specified percentage of manufactured products, and this changes by year, needs to be produced in the US. So you can see that in 2024, it starts off at 40% of manufactured products. And as we go, later into time, it increases up to 55%. The key thing here is also that for projects that don't meet domestic content requirements, there is an elective payment reduction, so to speak. So if you're starting construction before 2024, there is no, I guess, reduction. You still get 100% of your applicable credit. But if you start your construction in 2024 and you don't meet domestic content, you can see there's a 10% haircut on the credit that you would otherwise receive. And if construction starts after 2025 and you're not meeting domestic content, there is no credit applicability specific to direct pay. So that is a big one to take note of for projects that are starting after 2025. Talked about the wage and apprenticeship requirements, and this was in order to get the 5 times multiplier. It applies specifically to construction, and so 100% prevailing wage for laborers and mechanics must be paid throughout that. And there is a certain amount of apprenticeship hours that need to be met. If construction has already started, that's 10%. If construction is starting, in 2023, that apprenticeship hour ratio need to be 12.5%. And then for construction starting after 2023, apprenticeship requirement is 15%. Okay, so what defines the start of construction that we're talking about, before December 31st, 2024? There's a couple of criteria that the IRS has put into their notices. First is the 5% safe harbor. So at least 5% of the eligible work is contracted. And when you think about the 5%, that's 5% of what you think your construction costs will be. I would go higher than that just to be on the safe side. The other criteria to meet is a physical work test. And so physical work has to commence. There's no real minimum dollar amount, and a binding written contract must be in place. There is also a continuality clause, and so the project needs to be placed into service within 4 years of starting construction. So you can't just have a big push to start your construction and then not advance continuously. So how do you actually claim this investment tax credit? I showed a 2022 example, but it is Form 3468. You actually would have to work with a tax advisor to figure out your eligible project costs, but you end up following the formulas that I mentioned previously. If you're able to meet your domestic content, if you're able to get your multipliers, you end up adding that all up and filling out this form, sending it to the IRS, and we're still looking for some guidance as to how this payment will be received, if it's a one-time payment, or if it will come in increments, just given the magnitude and cost of some of these projects. And I guess in terms of timing of payment and and how it works, you do need to fill out a pre-filing registration. There's a number associated with that. IRS released guidance about that, I think this summer. But you start once you place your system in service, the year after that is when you would fill out that form I shared in the last slide. And in theory, that next tax year is when you would see your payment. So that's another important thing to note if you're thinking about these projects. You do need to be able to independently finance them. There is also a up to 15% reduction if you're using tax exempt bonds to pay for the project. So they don't really want you to double dip on the tax exemptions. So that's something else to keep in mind as you're financing projects. And so I guess the key takeaway here is with the IRA, we're taking a lot of uncertainty out of these clean energy projects, and we can move forward with confidence. Previously, we're always doing these evaluations of our biogas projects and trying to see what makes the most sense, trying to make sure that it will still align with your goals. Maybe economics are a consideration, but we always want to do that without having to rely on grants. And typically we'll apply for them afterwards. The nice thing about the IRA is that it's fairly prescriptive in nature. It is a lot of work to prepare for it, but with the certainty of the IRA and understanding how much potential revenue you could get back, it does help to make decisions during the planning phase. So how do you prepare for the IRA? It's complicated. I'm not a tax advisor, but I would recommend hiring a tax advisor if you are looking to pursue it for your RNG projects, your digesters, battery storage, solar, cogeneration. There's a lot of fine print in there, a lot of like reading between ands and ors. So definitely recommend working with a tax advisor. But you also need to evaluate the project, confirm that you meet the direct pay eligibility requirements. There's also what I mentioned, a cost segregation study. And so that entails understanding and working with a tax accountant as to what the eligible project costs are. I mentioned in general, you kind of apply your construction costs as to your eligible project costs, but there are some caveats with that, like a building cost doesn't necessarily apply, but some of the indirect costs may also be eligible, and that's where a tax accountant would support figuring out what that looks like. In terms of documenting the start of construction, I think that's an important one. Just, in the public sector, it does take a while to get projects moving. And so aligning your strategy to start construction, making sure that you are meeting the minimum requirements as to what the IRS will, consider as physical under the physical work test, if that's your pathway. So just getting another opinion on that. Because in general, you do have to have more than just like your site cleared. You've got to pour foundations for your major equipment, as an example. Tax advisor would also help to evaluate the domestic content requirements. They are a little tricky. There's a lot of accounting involved. And then lastly, you would want to work with them to compile and prepare the filing documents with the IRS. And so overall, recommend if you are going to develop an IRA eligible project, working with a tax advisor, making sure that you understand the intent of the IRA, what the general requirements are, and all of this is to really make sure you're providing the right documentation in the event that the IRS does perform an audit. You want to have these files available. So that's all I had for today. I guess we have time for questions now.
Well, thank you, Noji. I think we will still hold on questions until everyone has spoken, and we'll do them all at once, if that's okay.
Sounds
And
good.
and with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Carla de Las Casas. Carla is a business leader and client service manager with Brown and Caldwell, with over 20 years of experience delivering solutions to our complex water challenges. She has experience in water, wastewater treatment, reuse, conservation, and water stewardship strategies. Her experience spans a variety of industries, including food and beverage, data centers, oil and gas, petrochemicals, algae to biofuel, and municipal. Carla collaborates with clients to address water risks as part of their environmental, social, and governance strategy by incorporating facility water efficiency projects and or community watershed solutions. Private corporations are funding projects that ultimately result in increased water availability and reduce water risk. And this is a really intriguing subject to me that I think offers a lot of opportunity for our sector. And it's a great pleasure to welcome you, Carla.
Thank you, Greg, and everybody for letting me be with you today and share some of the lessons learned that we have today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully that works for you.
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit here because Noji has been talking very specifically about IRA grant opportunities. I'm talking about a specific new source. This is the private corporations, investments, and partnerships that are available for utility projects. And this is to meet their ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance commitments that they have made towards water stewardship, as well as climate goals. So these are commitments that their CEOs are making to address climate change and water scarcity. We are all subject to this risk, and everybody's trying to go at their own, trying to mitigate risk, but we can also work together and approach more from a regional perspective. So I know that because this webinar and the audience is primarily interested in RNG, I'm going to touch base a little bit on some case studies on the RNG side, but I also wanted to talk about water because that presents a very unique opportunity. So what we have seen since 2020 is a sharp increase in CEOs from corporates making this type of ESG commitments. And the environmental side, it could be carbon focus or water reductions, but these commitments are driven by a better return of the investment. So there's multiple case studies and research out there that demonstrate the business case for making this type of investments. It's also driven by investor demands. So all of these corporations have to answer to their investors, and their investors are asking them questions. What are you doing to mitigate risk, either on the water or climate change? And then there's also driven by talent retention. The younger generations are now seeking to work for companies that are really doing more. They are environmentally and socially responsible. So they now have to also answer to those investors as well as the new talent that they're seeking to retain. These type of commitments, there's multiple examples out there, both on the water and climate side. What you'll see is commitments from large corporations. So if you think back a decade ago, the beverage industry was the front and center leading this type of efforts. So think Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. Since then, I think that the tech sector, corporations like Microsoft and Google and Amazon Web Services have been at the forefront behind the beverage sector with the magnitude of investments that they're making to address these challenges. We also have examples throughout different industries, including the public sector with more of the innovator side of utilities publishing sustainability reports. So the commitments could be around carbon neutral, say by 2030, but it could also be around water. So in addition to getting their house in order by reducing their water footprint, they're also making commitments that go beyond that. These are commitments that say we're going to replenish more water than we consume in our operations. And in order to meet that commitment, what you have to do is go outside your facility boundaries, go into looking for partners like the utilities or other NGOs that play a key role within the watershed to make investments in water projects that either replenish, that essentially make more water available to their communities. The key distinction here is that they don't own the water. They are simply taking credit for the investment that they're making, and then they use that data to report back into their sustainability report. So there has been an increasing demand in those type of services to either reduce carbon emissions, reduce water footprint, and then also identify this type of water replenishment projects that overall enhance their ESG score. So they make them look better for the investors. In terms of the state of the market, there's a lot of studies out there that show what a sharp increase in disclosures we have been seeing over the last 5 years. The majority of the companies are at a minimum reducing or maintaining their water withdrawals. And then there's also the business case for them to act now, because it actually costs them more to do nothing than to implement or invest in some of these projects. So there's a business case here for them to be making these investments, but there's also the case for doing collective action and partnering with other stakeholders within the watershed where they're operating to really address the complex challenges that we're facing, both from the water and the climate side of things. From the decarbonization side, we talked a lot about RNG being critical to California's greenhouse gas reduction plan. There's a growing supply of RNG in California, and there's even a broader opportunity across the US and even bigger globally. So there is a lot of investor demand for either reducing your carbon emissions, investing in this type of projects, and really working towards those goals that you have of carbon neutral and partnering for a collective action. The first case study that I have is from the city of Phoenix, and this is courtesy of Patty Kennedy of the city of Phoenix. City of Phoenix provides wastewater service for Phoenix and for partner cities. They have a 230 MGD capacity at their 91st Avenue wastewater treatment plant. So back in 2010, they were considering several options. They were looking at on-site CHP, selling green power to the grid, RNG sales to fuel their vehicle market, and then RNG to the gas pipeline. In terms of ownership structures, they also look at several models, and they face challenges like any other utility. Ultimately, they set it into this ownership model with Ameresco as being their only remaining option. So now the city of Phoenix is one of the only large wastewater treatment plants that is also selling RNG in the US via a P3 model. The way that this is working is that Ameresco is owning and operating the facility. They purchase the biogas from the partner cities. Then the cities then lease the property and the easement and deliver the biogas. In this model, they have a royalty of over 1 million per year, but they are also, have other benefits, right? In addition to reducing their emissions and working towards their sustainability goals, they are utilizing a wasted renewable resource. They're reducing their O&M, and it's a really positive PR scenario for all the entities involved. The other case study that I have is from Nextera. Nextera is a clean energy company, so they have a portfolio of investments in wind, solar, RNG, and nuclear. They are a large private investor. They have over 40 billion in renewables, and they also have their own carbon emissions goals by 2045 without carbon offsets. What they do is that in addition to doing their own investments, they are also supporting decarbonization in the US power sector. So they have different models where they would either invest and own, so they were acquiring utilities, or they are collaborating with municipalities to invest in different types of projects. So they are an owner and operator of biogas and RNG facilities, over 30 facilities in the US. And they have this equity financing arrangement, which is ultimately common and preferred for them. For the Napa Sand case study that we have here, that investment that NextEra provided was going to allow Napa Sand to process additional biogas from co-digestion. It's ultimately a key component of climate change mitigation plan for Napa Sand, and it's one of the few projects of its kind. So that's on the biogas RNG side of things. I'm going to switch gears again to talk about water, because I think that this model of water investments driven by sustainability goals could really also be applicable to other types of utility type projects. So I just want to bring that up to your attention. So when these private corporations are making these investments, they're really looking into the same watershed where they are operating. And they are going about the watershed and identifying key stakeholders that they could partner with. This could be the utility, like I mentioned before, and they could be investing, say, in an aquifer storage and recovery project. Or they could be working with an NGO and partnering with a farmer to either change a crop. Any of the projects that they're investing in is ultimately resulting in more water availability to that community. So working with the utility presents several benefits, and we can discuss those. One of the challenges that they have is that there's a shortage of projects available where they can invest. When they invest in a project, they want to have a little bit more certainty in terms of the schedule of that project, how much volume replenished, the budget, and ultimately that tends to be a lower risk of implementation working with a reputable partner like the utility could be. So this is creating a new fund of opportunity for utilities. It's a great resource of funding just because there's very few strings attached. You could use private funding to attract other sources of funding. You could use it as a seed funding and then, go to your board and say this project is, supported by a corporation. There's very few strings attached. The only thing that they are requiring is monitoring data that then they can use to report in their sustainability report. So in compared to state and federal grants, it's a much easier deal to report back to those. So I was going to share a video. In this example, we have PepsiCo making investments in Southern California. They ultimately invested a 1.5 million grant to work with the Water Replenishment District of Southern California for an inland injection well. Again, this is an investment, and the only requirement from WRD is to report the same water meter data that they're collecting every year, and then PepsiCo can use that data to report back in their sustainability report on a yearly basis. It's a really great partnership in terms of also addressing the drought resiliency. WRD was relying on imported water from Northern California as well as Colorado River Basin, and we all know how stressed that water basin is. So by creating their own sources of water, by treating wastewater, advanced treatment, and injecting it into the ground, creating a new source that now it's available for them to use later, they're creating a drought resiliency in a water security scenario for their own community. So it's a really good example of how this could work. I'm going to share the video. It's only less than 3 minutes long, and then we'll come back for a close-up.
We're here at the Leo J. Vanderland's facility, and this facility is an advanced water treatment facility which produces about 8 million gallons of purified water on a daily basis. We use about 5.5 million gallons of that water at our seawater intrusion barriers to keep seawater from intruding to the groundwater basins. But the rest of that water, we have the opportunity with this new inland injection well to inject it into the groundwater to replenish the groundwater in this area. This project was made possible by a grant from PepsiCo, And Brown & Caldwell was helpful in bringing us together with PepsiCo because they saw that we had collinear visions. We were able to take the grant from PepsiCo and construct this inland injection well to help replenish the groundwater in this area right beneath our feet.
PepsiCo launched PepsiCo Positive in 2021 to take sustainability to the next level and to transform the way that we do our business.
Brown & Caldwell has been supporting PepsiCo's water replenishment program by identifying, vetting, and prioritizing water replenishment projects, particularly in the areas of high water scarcity where PepsiCo operates.
So we receive treated wastewater from the plant next door. We take that a step further by sending it through our microfiltration process and then through reverse osmosis, after which it is sterilized with a UV sterilization system and is chlorinated, which brings it back up to drinking water standards, and then it is pumped into the ground with our new injection well.
The really exciting thing about these partnerships is that their visions align. Partnering with the Water Replenishment District of Southern California enabled long-term sustainability water security for their local communities, but it was also critical in the advancement of PepsiCo's goals.
We consider this collaboration a success because it aligns really well with our water replenishment goals and WRD's objective for drought resilience and water independence.
You know, we live in a semi-arid area, and we import a lot of water from Northern California and the Colorado River. When we have an injection well in this area, that means we can store our own water right here in our own community, which is safeguarding and protecting the groundwater in this area for future generations.
Okay, so hopefully that was of interest to you. I would just want to leave you with some of these investment trends that we are seeing. At the top of the list, I would say collective action and strategic investments would, there's a lot of complex challenges that we're trying to solve. And in order to get to move the needle and make a positive impact in our communities, we really have to work together. So it's critical that we have corporate action, that we are addressing how much water these corporations are using, that they are getting their house in order, but that they're also contributing to the projects that, either the utility or the other NGOs are participating in, to really bring all these actors together so that we can make a positive impact and really get that collective action. Recognizing that this is a shared vision, that it's needed to scale that positive impact and truly mitigate both water risk as well as climate change. This co-funding opportunity, it's a real opportunity to leverage that private sector corporation investments that they are participating in and use it to attract additional funds or to prioritize your projects in your CIP list. You may have a project that may have been there for a while that is not really getting the support, and you could use this to move it up the list, but then also leverage that funding to then also partner with the state and federal grants to get more projects in the ground and really make a bigger impact faster. So that's all I have for today. Hopefully you have some questions for us at the end, and happy to discuss that later.
Thank you very much, Carla. And I definitely have some questions. And for the audience, please type your questions in the Q&A. And my pleasure to introduce our next speakers that will round out the panel. And this presentation is from PG&E. Aparna Sharma is a principal transactor on the renewable natural gas procurement team at PG&E. Her role includes leading solicitations, contract negotiation, and industry research. An engineer by education, she has been in the energy industry for over 15 years and worked in electric operations and trading before joining the newly formed team, focused on all things RNG. And following Aparna will be Dana Rice, who is an expert gas interconnection manager on the business development and implementation team with a focus on renewable natural gas projects. Her responsibilities include facilitating development, construction, and commission of pipeline quality gas interconnections from various feedstock sources. She continues to expand RNG development by providing project management and creating innovative solutions for the utilities gas system. And, you know, I think everyone is aware, but SB 1440 really provides tremendous opportunity for the wastewater sector for pipeline injection. And with that, welcome, Aparna.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by saying thank you for having us here with you and giving the opportunity to talk to CASA members. This has been a really quick turnaround, really fruitful conversations with Greg over the past couple of months in PG&E's interest to expand the RNG portfolio that we manage. The team came into existence earlier this year, and that was a direct result of the directives from CPUC that mandates procurement of RNG to California investment-owned utilities, and there's targets associated to it. So my intent today is, when I'm presenting to the CASA members, to kind of give a little deeper dive into what the RNG program at PG&E looks like, what are the driving forces behind it, how the program is structured, what is the eligibility criteria, and how are we running the solicitations. So without further ado, if you can go on to the next slide. I'm sure most of the audience is very familiar with the two driving forces behind RNG biomethane expansion in California. 1383 came about with targets to reduce the organic waste, the food waste that gets sent to California landfills, and to also reduce the short-lived climate pollutants emitted within California. 1440 gave the much-needed tools to the California Public Commission that requested and allowed the CPUC to give directives to the IOUs for mandatory targets that are to be fulfilled within given timelines. The way these two Senate bills were introduced and further on the CPUC issued decision, the decision quoted here is 22-02025, the implementation of SB 1440 is then requiring the IOUs to work within a very stringent framework as to what qualifies to be the feedstocks that are permitted within the timelines of procurement, how the overall program gets managed in terms of the oversight being provided. So it's not just the IOUs that are running the program. There is oversight in setting up of a procurement advisory group, which consists of non-market participant members. There's a good footprint of prominent environmental justice groups in the PAGs that we have established, and it is approved and blessed by the commission. So as we run the solicitations, the PAG gets a first view, a first preview of the offers that are on the table, any short lists that the IOUs are working with, as well as the final agreements, if there are any, that are arrived at between the submitting offers and the procuring entity, which in our case, of course, is PG&E. Furthering on the directions given by the commission is then the coinage of the term Standard Biomethane Procurement Methodology, SBPM, which is essentially a cost effectiveness measure that is a tool to kind of weigh the benefits of procuring RNG versus conventional gas. And SBPM, again, it's a jointly filed paper, it's a jointly filed evaluation model that was submitted to CPUC and has been approved since, that the IOUs are required to use in any evaluation or assessment of the offers that we receive during our solicitations. I do want to point out that in 2025, the commission does reserve the right to review the program and potentially provide some amendments to the decision language that was originally published, or, you know, as most things regulatory, and given the RNG market being so nascent, I think 2025 is going to be a good opportunity for the market, the industry, and the policymakers to be aligned in terms of what we have learned since the decision came out in 2022. So these 3 years are essentially a good learning curve for all stakeholders involved in the process. If we can go into the next slide. So I want to touch upon, the first slide basically covered why PG&E is procuring RNG. I want to go into how much of these procurement targets are, or how much RNG are we looking to procure. The decision has split the targets into two big buckets. The short-term target, which is for the year's duration 2025 to 2029. And again, to point out, these are delivery targets. So delivery between the duration of 25 and 29. We can procure something that is out there producing. There is no restriction on, you know, you can only procure something that is 25 onwards. So if there's something out there, PG&E is very open to procuring and writing out an agreement and contract as soon as possible. The big distinction between the short-term and the medium-term target I want to point out here, aside from the growth that you see in the amount of gas that is associated with these targets, is the feedstock variation. Now, the decision in spirit is implementing SB 1440, as discussed in the previous slide, right? And one of the things that we want to ensure is reduce the organic waste that ends up in the landfills and provide a marketplace that gives tools and measures to better use that food waste, and hopefully reduce emissions that are an end result of that food waste ending up in landfills, right? The feedstocks that are allowed or permitted per the decision is where these two targets are very different. The short-term target requirements are very stringent in terms of what qualifies. For example, you can see that there is no dairy gas allowed, or there is no landfill gas allowed in the short-term target procurement. However, when we expand to the medium-term target, those two avenues kind of open up. Given the audience in mind, I do want to say that our understanding is the wastewater treatment facilities would fit in the short-term target bucket. And Greg, thank you for giving that critique early this morning. Keeping the audience in mind again, both buckets are open and eligible for wastewater treatment plants or municipal sewage waste facilities. So this is a good platform to kind of publicize this program, which is why we're here today. And if there's any questions pertaining to the eligibility in terms of which feedstock or which bucket would CASA members be falling in, we can definitely address those in the questions after the session. With that, I'd like to move on to the next slide. Now, moving on to the what of the RNG program at PG&E. Once we've discussed and established why we are procuring and kind of how much we're procuring, these are again the constraints / guidelines that are given in the CPUC decision. So effectively, we are limited in procuring from facilities that are within California. I know in previous speakers, the content, kind of alluded to the fact that, yes, climate change is the larger problem that everyone's trying to solve. And to that effect, there are more RNG producers in rest of the US or rest of North America versus in California right now. But as much as we would like to procure for the purposes of this program, we are constrained to stay within the geographies of California. The producers have to be within California. The other mandatory requirements must be met within the decision that have been called out. Some of those are very environment related, such as there should not be any negative impact to the water or air quality from the projects that we are going to be procuring. Those projects should also then be removing any siloxanes or any PFAs in their end product. There are RNG standards that are defined within the decision, such as how much hydrogen sulfide per parts per million is allowed in by the decision. So those are all mandatory requirements that PG&E has been including in our ongoing solicitations. And again, the decision, it's a public document, but if you have any questions on that, we'd love to answer them in the later part of the panel. The term constraint is interesting, and that is mostly to address the economies of scale and kind of to address some of the feedback that was received in the working sessions that were put together both by the Commission as well as the IOUs in forming up the decision and leading up to the decision. And that was the longevity of the contracts is very key to drive this nascent RNG market, because a lot of the facilities do not currently exist. And if we are looking at really promoting the buildup of a pipeline, pun intended, a healthy pipeline to keep RNG going and flourishing, we need a contract tenor of at least 10, 15-year range. Having said that, there is no floor defined in terms of a constraint given by the decision. The evaluation is again very specifically called out in the decision. Of course, each IOU reserves the right to evaluate in addition to the SBPM, which is again a publicly available document that participants to our solicitation can review, have questions on. But essentially what SBPM kind of looks at outside of the cost effectiveness part is also the overall carbon intensity footprint of the gas that is being produced, the proximity to a remote location or a disadvantaged community. So the overall intent, again, is not just to the spirit of the law in reducing the SLCPs within California, but overall the benefits that can be garnered and then passed on to the larger community. So that is all captured in the SBPM. The review process I mentioned very briefly in the previous slide that requires each of the offers and each of the rounds to be in advisement with the Procurement Advisory Group, or PAG, as we're calling. ED, the Energy Division of the California Public Utilities Commission, is also kept very much informed. And at the end, any offer that is finalized as an agreement between PG&E and the submitting offer needs to be approved by the CPUC. Without CPUC approval, there isn't going to be any execution of the contract. So that is a very key step in the overall approval of any contracts or offers that PG&E is going to be executing. A key question that keeps coming up is the price tiers that have been called out in the decision. Where did these price points come from? So I've tried to highlight the sources of where the $17.70 and the $26 price points came up from. And again, this is something that is very clearly called out in the decision, and the IOUs are to abide by this. So we are very mindful of getting the best offer, keeping in mind PG&E's customers' interest, economic interest. At the same time, these tiers are also kind of determining the offers that we are seeing out there. And I'm sure there will be questions on this specific topic as has come up in our conversations with other such audiences. So I would hope that in our post-session Q&A, we will have some questions on this. Moving on to the next slide. So given the overview of what we're procuring and how we're procuring, I want to share that PG&E has already launched one solicitation this year. The second one was launched on November 8th and is expecting letters of intent for any participants to come in by November 17th, that is tomorrow. So if any of the audience members here is interested, please send us a notice on the RNG procurement mailbox that is called out here. If there's any questions, of course, we try to maintain any FAQs that come up during our interactions with industry partners on our webpage. That's www.pgne@/RNGRFO. If not, you can also direct your questions at our mailbox that is again captured here. A key question that also comes up, I'm trying to address questions that are obvious in my talk here, and then later on we'll address more. Since the targets are flexible targets per the decision, PG&E does anticipate for all likelihood that we will have several solicitations each year until these targets are met, or the decision, as in 2025 review, decides to go in a different direction. So if the industry is not ready to meet the demand right now, this is going to be an ongoing process, and we are treating this as a learning opportunity in how we can work together better. With this, I am going to pass on the baton to Dana, who is going to talk about how facilities can interconnect their RNG supply into PG&E system. Thank you all.
All right, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to cover kind of quickly an overview of what our current interconnections look like, how we interconnect projects, and then a few recommendations that we have. So if we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. On the left here, you'll see a visual of the current biomethane projects that we're working on and where they're all located across our service territory. Right now, we have approximately 75 projects that are anywhere from a screening study phase, which is our first phase of a project, to construction. And there's various feedstock source types, such as dairy, landfill, wastewater treatment plant, ag waste, food waste, and woody biomass. These projects have been taking 2 years or longer to complete, so keep that in mind when I tell you we have 75. They're not all coming online right away. They're in different phases. On the right side of this slide, you'll see a graph that shows the approximate amount of renewable gas that we have injected into our pipelines and that we're transporting. The increments are in MCF, which is 1,000 cubic feet. And to date, we have 4 interconnections that are flowing renewable gas, with the first one opening its valve in December of 2021. The first 2 interconnects that we had are connected to us through a third-party pipeline, which is an extensive pipeline system that's not owned or operated by PG&E, but rather by a third party. And their pipeline system connects to us to provide gas that we transport on our system. And historically, it was used to provide fossil well gas. But it's been repurposed, and it provides both renewable and fossil gas at this time. So these first 4 interconnections are all dairy feedstock, and they're continuing to expand as they bring on more dairies through existing interconnections that they've made with us. The line on the graph gives you an idea of how much renewable gas we've received so far. And as of September of this year, we've reached 1.6 billion cubic feet of renewable gas flowing through our system. In 2024, we've got 6 planned interconnections coming online. In just a few months here, we're going to have a landfill feedstock that comes online. That'll be followed shortly by food waste. And the other 4 that are coming online next year are dairy. We're also planning on the existing 4 interconnections that we have to continue to ramp up and bring on additional dairy. So we'll see more RNG coming through those interconnections. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll provide an overview of our interconnection process. So here's how we interconnect projects. We've got 4 phases. First is the screening study. So that's done at no cost to the interconnector. Once we have a completed fact sheet, our system planning team does an analysis of the nearest pipeline to determine if on a 24-hour basis, 365 days a year, can we absorb the maximum amount of renewable gas that the interconnector wants to inject. If that closest pipeline has a low demand or maybe some constraints, then we will find the next closest pipeline that can accept the gas with no constraints. And then we'll present this information and provide a preliminary pipeline route and the approximate distance of that route to our pipeline. We'll also provide normal operating pressure and maximum allowable operating pressure of the pipeline. And then moving into preliminary engineering, that's where those screening study results are confirmed through a hydraulic analysis and then further analyzed. The project team is put together at this time. We'll do a site visit with the interconnector so that we can really get a lay of the land. We'll see where the conditioning facility is going to be placed. We'll take a look at where we want to put our biomethane skid. And during this phase, an initial class 5 cost estimate is produced and presented, and this is all done within 90 business days. And then we'll move into detailed engineering. So per Gas Rule 29, I do want to point out that interconnectors have the option to self-build, self-design, or PG&E can do the work. So if an interconnector decides to self-build and design, we'll provide a list of approved vendors, the material that needs to be ordered. We'll also have oversight of that design. We'll verify approved vendors and contractors are used. We'll verify the materials from our approved list are being used. And we'll have oversight of the construction work to ensure that everything is done to our standards. During this phase of the project, the station design is completed, materials get ordered, and then we'll also provide cost estimates throughout that detailed engineering. So we typically issue a 30, 60, 90%, and also an issue for construction estimate. And this is all done within 180 business days. I do want to caveat that to tell you that we really, during this phase of the project, we're really working in parallel with the interconnector to make sure that we're in line with like our construction's happening when your construction's happening, because we don't want to have idle assets out there, neither do you. So if it's going to take more time on the interconnectors end, that's fine. We'll adjust our timeline accordingly. We do invoice for the cost of the project initially in the preliminary engineering study and then throughout the detailed engineering study, just to ensure that the project is fully funded prior to construction. And before we release a project to operation, we do need to ensure that the pipeline quality gas requirements and gas rules 21 and 29 are being met. And we do this by having pre-injection gas samples taken and then analyzed prior to having renewable gas flow into the system. If you move to the next slide, these are just a few recommendations we've come up with along the way as we've been working on interconnecting projects. The first one being, it's really important to engage the utility early in the process. So we want to take a look at the project location to see if we've got a pipeline nearby. And if we do, does it have the absorption capacity to accept the gas at the location? The earlier we start talking about the project together, the better, so that we can help into making some future decisions. Conditioning facilities need electricity. So is there existing electricity at the project location, or will we need to get an electric service there? If an electric service is needed, we'll need to start working on that early on. Also consider the option to use a backup generator fueled by natural gas so that if there's a power outage, the conditioning facility can still function. So our biomethane skid, it also needs a small amount of power to run. And when we install the skid, we put a gas powered generator on site that's connected to the skid so that it's still going to run even if electricity is lost. Does the conditioning startup process need a gas load service? So if so, is there already a gas service at the project location, or will we need to install one? Regarding regulatory and permitting barriers, we'll want to take a look at the location of the project and determine what type of permits are needed. Are there environmental concerns that need to be addressed? Will we need to cross a waterway, a road, or possibly go under a railroad to get to the pipeline system? some of the permitting takes quite a bit of time, so it's really good to get in front of it early on. And then incentives. So state and federal grants and incentives are out there for renewable gas projects. It's always a good idea for the interconnector to make sure that they're taking the steps needed to apply and qualify for them, and know that, what's needed. So like, do they need invoices need to be tracked, costs need to be tracked for reimbursement? Those are just examples. Then think about how to handle operations and maintenance. So something we've been thinking about with our existing projects that are online, and I think we're going to start moving forward with is, we're finding it to be more beneficial if we can coordinate our maintenance on the skid with the interconnectors maintenance on the conditioning facility, so we can minimize the downtime where gas isn't being injected into the system. We also want to know ahead of time if there's going to be any changes to gas flow volumes, or if the interconnector plans on being completely shut down for a period of time, so that we can then plan accordingly. Then we have one more slide that's just our contact information. So if I think we've got time for some Q&A now, but if there's anything you think about that you want to talk through, or you have questions after today, please reach out to Aparna and I. We're more than happy to help.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dana and Aparna. All the speakers, great jobs. And we'd like to open it up to Q&A now. And since there are a number of participants on it, if you can type your questions in the Q&A would be great. There have been a number that have been put in already, and I have a few of my own. So perhaps we could just start with some Q&A. One question that I can start with for Noji is whether or not IRS has guidance published on the IRA. Is that something which is available yet?
There is some guidance available. I guess what guidance specifically are folks looking for? And I can drop a link in the chat.
Probably with respect to, the wastewater sector in particular, whether or not they have anything for our biomethane.
Yeah, I guess so the current thing that I guess I'm waiting for is guidance on how the wastewater greenhouse gases will be accounted. They refer to the GREET model, and Greg is like, in California, in the GREET model, wastewater biogas doesn't have a greenhouse gas emissions of 0. And so I guess I am curious to see how they draw the boundary around that for our industry. But
Right.
there's no guidance on that available yet, and I've been tracking it.
Okay, well, that's if you just keep us posted would be great. And there were several questions just asking whether the presentations will be made available after this session. And yes, copies of the presentations will be made available and sent to you all, and we also have a recording of it. The question for Carla is how would a wastewater plant initiate dialogue with a private sector partner to take advantage of the ESG opportunities? Is there any prescribed process, or do they just go through consultants?
I mean, the role that we play in this type of arrangements is that, we are helping the corporations find those projects. And because we have relationships with both utilities as well as the corporations, we can, connect the two, right? And one of the key things that we're trying to do is align in terms of metrics, because utilities have a lot of information and a lot of shovel-ready projects. The challenge is that they are not defining the projects in the same metrics to align with the programs that are available for funding. So we help the utilities, message the project and define the project with the right metrics so that we can say, yes, this project fits or doesn't fit this type of program. So that's the role that we have been playing. I think that there are a lot of utilities, particularly on the water side, that are in direct connection with these corporations. And I think that they have the opportunity to establish direct communications in that case to really open up the dialogue in terms of potential partnerships and projects available for funding.
Great, thank you. And one for Aparna. In terms of what is eligible for the program on both the short and the midterm, you mentioned wastewater plants, anaerobic digestion would be eligible. And I'm assuming is that whether they are co-digesting or not, the biomethane produced from our anaerobic digestion, or is there a higher priority given to co-digestion, but everything would be eligible?
There is no priority per se called out in the decision for whether or not it's co-digested or not, as long as it meets the rest of the requirements called out in the decision and meets the definition of the feedstock limitations for each of the targets. We are comfortable and confident enough that just based on our conversations with a few sanitation agencies and a few other wastewater treatment plants, we understand that currently either the biogas is just being flared or the solid waste is sent to landfills. And either of those cases, if the gas is captured, it qualifies. If the waste that is being currently sent to landfill, it's getting repurposed to produce biomethane and then gets injected in the pipeline, that qualifies as well. So I hope I'm answering the question. I do not see an issue of non-compliance to either of the targets as far as wastewater treatment facilities are concerned.
No, great news. That's great. And one that was posted in the Q&A is if someone misses the deadline tomorrow, would they still be eligible for this round? And if not, when do you expect, excuse me, the next solicitation to occur?
Sure. So I tried to give a little clarity. The deadline tomorrow is only for letters of intent to participate in this round of solicitation. And just a plain email, hey, we intend to submit for this round suffices. You can send the email to rngprocurement@pg&e.com. And then the complete offers aren't due until December 8th. So there is still time to send in the complete offer submissions. And to the question of when the next solicitation is going to be launched, I don't want to promise or be speculative, but the hopes and plans are there would be, if not 2, maybe 3 solicitations each year until we meet the targets, just based on the first solicitation that we ran and the kind of supply that is available out there in the market. It will take multiple solicitations a year to be able to meet the target.
So you would think maybe somewhere relatively early in 2024?
I would say Q1 of 2024. When in Q1, it depends on how this current solicitation goes and where that leads us.
Sure, thank you. Mm-hmm. And another one for Noji. Do you have a sense as to overall funding levels that are available through the IRA? I mean, is this, how many projects might be able to be, funded or be able to get the credit?
I guess there is a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to a certain level. And so what it currently states is if the year that I guess we deem that we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions to that threshold, if we were to meet it, the following year if projects were to apply for that tax credit, there would be a 25% reduction in the amount of credit. And then the subsequent year, it would be a 50% reduction. The next year, it would be a 75% reduction. So it does ratchet down if the target is met sooner than 2032.
Okay. Sounds great.
Yeah, there hasn't been a limit as to number of projects that they've mentioned there would be credits for.
Okay. And Carla, a question in terms of eligibility, would food waste that's going to be diverted from a landfill, the cleaning and ability to receive that at a wastewater plant for co-digestion be something that the private sector would be interested in as a project, do you think?
I think, it's typically we have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. It's kind of hard to say because I feel like to date, those type of investments have been, at least from the ESG side of things, have been, more focused on their own, offsetting their own carbon emissions. So that investment focus on ESG for the utility side of things hasn't been prevalent means of addressing those emissions. So I think that we need to kind of explore what would that look like. And I think that there's a true opportunity based on the discussions and the trends that we're seeing in the industry. It's just something that people have yet not connected the two. But there's certainly a lot of opportunities and projects that are happening here in California as well as in other states that we could take advantage of those partnerships.
And just as a follow-up to that, do I understand correctly that it's sort of analogous to a cap and trade program where the private sector is trying to, offset some of their own water usage or emissions or what have you, and therefore the public sector partnerships might be attractive?
From a water perspective, most people don't want to create an analogy to carbon market credits, a scenario. There's starting to be some startups that are doing a water credit, and it's more from a global perspective, very similar to carbon credits. So there's a lot of controversy around that. From a water perspective, we're addressing things at a local level, more a watershed per watershed. So replacing water in California is not the same as replacing water in Oklahoma. So that's kind of like the current approach, even though there's other folks that are trying to create a market for water credits.
Okay, thank you very much. And another one for Aparna or Dana, just wondering what the requirements are for RNG in order to be pipeline injected. Is there, and I know that there are, but maybe you could tell us where we could find the limits on gas quality.
Yeah, so there's quite an extensive list. You'll find it in Gas Rule 29, but also Gas Rule 21 has our fossil gas requirements. So I would look at both of those. You'll see it listed out what we're looking for to be pipeline quality, because each feedstock type has different constituents in it that we need to make sure are stripped out.
I would add to that. So what Dana is talking about is if you're connecting to the PG&E pipeline, right, you need to meet the Gas Rule 21 and 29, where the RNG is defined. What qualifies as PG&E's definition of RNG. For our solicitation purposes, our decision is open enough that we can potentially procure a producer that is connected to SoCal gas pipe, for example, or Kern or Mojave, right? What we are including in our solicitation language is the producers have to meet the guidelines or definitions of RNG of their respective interconnecting pipelines. So whatever the tariffs are that those pipes are, working under, operating under, that is one requirement. And then the second requirement is the requirements or limitations that are called out in the decision. And I've dropped the link to the CPUC decision in the chat while responding to that question, So hopefully that'll give people more insight into what those requirements are as well.
Great, thank you. And one for Noji that was in the Q&A on a question of domestic iron and steel, wondering if that refers only to structural parts of the project, like beams and members, or is it more than that?
The rule says anything that is structural in function. So I would assume, yes, that members and beams are included. If there are other structural supports that may be required, those would also be included.
Yeah.
But yeah, for example, like, bolts and nuts are not required to be made in the US.
Right. Okay, thank you. And Carl, there was a question on some states evidently don't allow public-private partnerships for project development. And it looks like you posted something in the Q&A on what states do and don't allow such arrangements.
Yeah, I just share a link to a good resource from DBIA that kind of summarizes for the different types of projects, whether or not it's transportation or wastewater type projects, and whether or not like this specific states allow for those type of P3 partnerships. So it's kind of like a quick summary for that.
Great, thank you. And another question for Aparna or Dana is just on those tiers and the structure. Just wondering what what qualities or what dictates what pricing tier a project might fall on. Is there some guideline for whether they're tier 1 or tier 3?
Not sure I quite truly understand the question. So the supplier is free to put any price they want on the RNG they're offering to us. We have absolutely no control on that. What they are offering to us and what we are able to negotiate with them and be able to agree on, that then determines what tier of advice letter will we submit to the commission for their approval. So the cost brackets, the price brackets are purely to determine what tier advice letter is it going to be when we go to the commission for their approval. And my understanding is the tiers are essentially, other than the scrutiny involved, is the timeline, how long it takes for the commission to make a decision, the turnaround time. So a tier 1 is, let's say, 30 to 90 days of turnaround time in getting an approval, versus tier 3 has seen sometimes longer than 12 months of a timeline of approval.
Excellent, thank you. And another one just posted is for Dana, wondering if the food waste digesters shown in your map represent 100% food waste digesters, or does it reflect co-digestion with wastewater plants?
That's a good question. So right now, the food waste that we have is 100% food waste. But that's not to say we'll get to see more different feedstock co-digestion type things come online. One thing I didn't mention is that we also have a virtual pipeline online. It's only, so it's trucked gas, but it's only dairy feedstock. But down the road, we have some projects that are looking into bringing other feedstock types through truck gas on a virtual pipeline as well.
Thank you. Let's see. Another question, I'm not sure I understand. Do you have any examples or experience where the wastewater treatment plant produces biogas and an on-site biosolids facility could use that gas for drying? I think we do have some examples of that. We have some gas used for drying, heat dryers at a couple of treatment plants, but I don't think that falls under the paradigm for any of these reimbursements. Then another question that I think you did answer, Aparna, was is there a penalty or some consequence for the investor-owned utilities if they don't meet the procurement requirements stipulated in the decision?
The short answer is no, there are no penalties at this time called out in the decision because these were flexible targets and there is some bank and borrow capabilities that are clearly called out in the decision. I've tried to capture that in my response to that question.
Yeah, great. Let's see, and then another one, you may have answered this already, Dana, but are there any projects underway with wastewater plants?
There are. So we actually have gotten quite a bit of interest just this past year. So they're in the very beginning stages, but we do have quite a few wastewater treatment plants that are looking to initiate projects, which is exciting for us.
Great. Yes, and let's see. Well, let's see. I guess we're winding down here, but I guess another question for Carla. The Phoenix example sounded like it was under private ownership now, but it sounds as if public-private partnerships are also acceptable and feasible. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that the case that we're trying to make here is that everything it's possible in that these ESG drivers or goals that we all have collectively to address climate change risk as well as water risk, it's creating these new opportunities for both partnerships as well as funding.
Great. Well, I can't thank you all enough. I think we are about at our time's end here, but I think this was a lot of great information and really timely. We're trying to get SB 1383 implemented and having sustainable uses for our biogas is, of course, of critical importance. So all three of the topics offer the opportunities for that, and I really appreciate your presentations. And we will share the presentations, and I think the Q&A information with all who registered for the session. And this is wonderful. Thank you again very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.